Owning a home is one thing, while renting is another. But whatever option you choose, it isn't pretty.
53% of those polled say they've thought about moving away.
When it comes to traffic, Torontonians don't have a lot of nice things to say.
It sucks. It absolutely sucks.
I know this news may sound like a major surprise to some of you, especially those of you who have been following me over the last few years, who knew that I actually left Toronto back during the pandemic in 2020. I moved to Calgary, spent a year there before moving back to Toronto, where I'm currently living. And I'm here to say that it's not a joke. I am leaving the city yet again, and I want to explain to y'all how and why I came to this tough decision. I know that making a video like this, sure, I probably might get slightly more views because of its title, but I also know that I open myself to potential criticism, or I'm pretty sure people will say something along the lines of,
"Hey Frank, you are such a flip-flopper, man. Like, I can't believe anything you do these days, because you would do one thing and then you do another. I've had enough. You know what? I'm going to leave a mean comment. Ha! Got you there."
Anyways, I'm only going to be sharing what I'm comfortable with, but I generally do hope that this video will assist those who are potentially also on the fence of leaving Toronto, or maybe you are just simply bored and you want to listen to me rant for the next 10 minutes or so. Before I get into it, I would appreciate if you guys could do me a quick favor, smash the like button, or if you really want, follow me on Instagram, because I actually recently created a real estate page as I recently got my license. So if you want to follow my journey or just want to say hello, please do so. And now let's begin. The first thing that jumps to mind as to why I'm leaving Toronto would ultimately have to do with long-term affordability. And I made a video a few months ago talking about, despite making a certain threshold of like $100,000 out in Toronto, I find it really hard to thrive out here without coming from like old money. It sort of just feels like I've been working my tail off over the last decade to put a roof over my head. And then it just feels like I'm just surviving, living the standard, the basics of renting a one-bedroom condo in Toronto for $1,800 while maintaining and owning a vehicle. Believe it or not, some may even argue that my way of living in Toronto is considered luxurious for people of my age group, because apparently this seems almost next to impossible. Because really think about it, how does one individual apparently pay for rent that's $2,500 without having the support from a partner or financial aid from like their parents or something like that? I am self-aware and grateful that I can rent a place all on my own in Toronto and even save a little bit each and every single month. But the challenge exists when I'm now looking to potentially buy a place for myself. And I know some of you may be thinking, but Frank, why not just continue renting your place? Because renting is a lot cheaper than owning in today's market. But let me remind you that renting with a landlord versus renting with your local apartment office looks completely different. And let me tell you that in Toronto, most people are doing the first one, which is renting with a landlord. I'll be transparent, my monthly expense per month is about $3,000. And what I do with my other take-home money is I like to invest that into an index fund like the S&P 500. This was essentially how I made renting worth it. The issue, however, is that 50% of condos in Toronto are owned by investors, and many, let's be real, don't care too much about being good landlords as much as they care about earning the next dollar. And so basically, as a tenant, good luck when something goes wrong with your unit, because the landlord may take a while to answer your call. And so I personally just wanted to own instead of renting from a landlord. And it just sounded so ridiculous to work this hard for a one-bedroom condo in Toronto, knowing that I'd want to one day trade this up for a two-bedroom, a townhouse, and then a detached house. But realistically, talking about that detached house is even a far stretch unless you want to go to like Hamilton, Ontario. Next for me would just be myself wanting a slower paced city once again. And I feel this comes naturally of age, but I'm just tired of this rapid, fast-paced city lifestyle that exists in Toronto. Like, the city has so much opportunities to even count. Number of great food options, people. But the thing is, there never seems to be a break or an off switch. No matter how early I wake up in the morning, there's already cars on the streets, people on the streets, caring about their day, probably even working their second or third job on the weekend, because let's not forget, you don't get a rest out in Toronto because your rent is like $2,500 a month. And so you're constantly surrounded by this environment of people on the go. And despite trying to go at my own pace, I find myself feeling like I need to be productive myself. It really does feel like because Toronto is such an expensive city, you are almost forced to move at a faster pace. Like, you cannot afford to move at a slow pace. And this is just my opinion, but I feel like a lot of people in Toronto are just too caught up with their own lives to really be compassionate. And I don't really blame them, and not to say that I'm perfect myself, but it's really hard to be compassionate with other people in general when you don't have it figured out yourself, when you're too caught up with yourself. Like, and you literally will hear it from other people. Like, you'll hear people in Toronto literally saying things like, oh my gosh, like after work, I have to go home because I have my home is in Vaughan and it takes like an hour and a half to get there. I have to leave right away. Or I have to get the second job to pay for rent because my rent's like $2,500. Now let's talk about slow burnout. And I feel like a lot of you resonated with my previous video where I talked about how living in Toronto over the years slowly wears you down mentally. And maybe perhaps some of you even foreshadow or sense that this was gonna be my upcoming video of why I'm leaving the city again. But it goes beyond just cost of living over here, because I just noticed doing simple tasks in this city is becoming more and more difficult for unnecessary reasons. Like, if I'm trying to just visit downtown Toronto to visit a friend to do some sort of activity, if I chose to drive downtown, it would take me like 30 to 40 minutes. And then that's no guarantee that I even would find a parking space that will cost me even more money per hour parking there. And then I say, like, maybe I don't want to drive, I'll take the TTC. Well, taking the TTC takes like an hour long, but there's no guarantee that I might get there in an hour because there might be delays. So I have to like factor in potential problems that might exist. From a financial standpoint, like, I don't need to tell you this, but it sort of just feels like you basically need to be a entrepreneur with a successful business, because working your 9-to-5 job, even with the help of your partner or roommate or whoever, probably won't be enough. And you probably need to be like a trust fund baby or something like that. The point that I'm trying to make here is that all these should be easy tasks are really catching up to me. And although I have tolerated it over the last decade, and I know that even when I moved back to Toronto, I knew what I'm getting myself into, but maybe I'm just ready to just admit that the city just doesn't align with what I want in life and where I want to be. Over the last year was one of the most challenging yet rewarding times of my life. I went through something personal and I reevaluated what were my values and what I visioned for the future. During this time, I extensively learned more about myself and what I prioritize, and I did this by looking within myself for the answers instead of looking at the outside world telling me what I needed to do. Not just that, I continuously looked to get out of my comfort zone. Like, beginning of this year, I did fitness classes and did classes that I thought I'd never do. Like, I did HIIT classes, Pilates classes, spin classes, tried therapy, and even got my real estate license to put the cherry on top. What I have discovered is that I just don't see a future living in Toronto anymore. It's just not who I am and what I have discovered with in terms of my values. And honestly, I just don't see myself living in a 2-bedroom condo for the rest of my life. Or simply, I just don't want to fight tooth and nail going through downtown traffic to visit important people in my life. And so I came to the realization that I am ready to leave Toronto once again. And despite what other people may think about me, this is not the life that I vision for myself. I vision a life where I'm closer to my immediate family. I vision a life that I one day start my family on my own. I want a detached house, maybe even have a pet dog. And I know that this could be accomplished out in Toronto, but I don't want it to be. And that's what I've come to terms. So this brings me to my conclusion, and I'm sure all of you are probably wondering where I'm headed to. And I have decided to move back to Calgary, Alberta. This was a decision that I've been thinking about over the last year that, truthfully, I don't think would have even worked out unless the right cards fell into place, and I'm so glad that it did. I did feel like the first time I moved to Calgary, I was dealt with a bad hand, just given that it was the pandemic time, everything was closed, and ultimately I was unemployed. But now going back to Toronto, I feel like I have a new appreciation given that I am a little bit older and I now understand more about myself, and I know that what I am gaining from going to Calgary and what I am sacrificing from leaving Toronto. I am not saying that Toronto was the worst city in Canada and that like Calgary is like the promised land. And to be quite transparent, as much excitement that I have moving back to Calgary, there's a piece of me that's a little bit fearful, and I panic a little bit because I don't know what's on the other side completely. And you know what? Damn right. because my strengths come from my resiliency in making this decision in the first place and not knowing what's on the other side. I'm going to move to Calgary and continue getting out of my comfort zone, continue making YouTube videos, and even continue real estate. Is there a chance that all of this tanks and nothing comes out of it? Absolutely. And you know what? I'm still going to do it. So thank you all for watching my video on why I'm leaving Toronto yet again. If you have any sort of questions, let me know in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, follow me on Instagram, follow my journey, and I guess I'll see you guys when I'm in Calgary and in the next video. Peace.